The bride who traveled 5 days to get married. This love story will move you. The train whistle echoes through the Cheyenne station as a young Irish woman steps down, her heart racing and a wedding letter clutched in her trembling hands. Rose Murphy had just completed a 5-day journey across the American continent to be united with a man she knew only by correspondence. In 1882, when the world still wrestled between tradition and progress, a young Irish woman with fiery red hair and an even more ardent heart arrived in the small town of Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. Rose Murphy carried more than her few possessions. She carried the determination of a soul that knew struggle, but had never surrendered to it. This is a story about the encounters that transform lives, about education as a bridge between different worlds, and about how true love grows slowly, like deep roots that survive the harshest winters. Before we begin this journey together, I'd like to know, where are you following along from right now? What is your city, your corner of the world? Leave it in the comments. It's always a pleasure to get to know our fellow travelers through their words. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if this story touches your heart. Your interactions help us continue to bring you these narratives that connect eras and emotions. Now take a deep breath, close your eyes for a moment and come with me. Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. The year 1882, the train hissed through the golden expanse like an iron serpent, cutting through the eternal silence of the plains. Rose Murphy pressed her face against the dusty window, watching the endless landscape that stretched beyond any dream she had ever dared to dream. The wind that seeped through the cracks whispered promises in an unknown language, carrying with it the scent of sage and the wild freedom of a world yet to be discovered. Her fingers, delicate but marked by hard work, clutched a small worn leather bag that held all she owned: a few carefully mended dresses, her grandmother's rosary, letters of recommendation, and, more precious than any treasure, 3 books wrapped in linen cloth. Her heart beat to a wild rhythm, a symphony of anxiety and hope that echoed the steady clang of the wheels on the tracks. Cheyenne appeared on the horizon like a mirage made real. Wooden houses scattered under the infinite sky. A few streets laid out with the precision of those who believe in the future, and in the distance, the constant movement of men and cattle that gave life to that frontier between the known and the wild. Rose adjusted her simple hat, checked that her red hair was properly pinned up, and took a deep breath. 23 years of life had prepared her for this moment, though nothing could truly prepare her for what was to come. At the station, a middle-aged man waited for her with a makeshift sign that read Miss Murphy. Lean and nervous, he introduced himself as Harold Winters, a member of the school board. During the short walk to the boarding house where she would stay, he talked non-stop about the responsibilities and expectations that rested on her. Rose listened with polite attention, but her mind wandered through the streets she observed, imagining the children she would soon meet, the young minds she would help to blossom. Mrs. Hartwell's boarding house was a simple but clean 2-story building, with lace curtains in the windows and a garden someone had tended with care. Rose was led to a small room on the 2nd floor, with a window overlooking the main street. There, alone for the first time since she had left Ireland years ago, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She sat on the narrow bed, looked at her own hands and whispered a silent prayer for the grandmother who had raised her and who now rested in a distant land. The next day, Harold led her to the school. The building was modest, with 2 rooms and a small bell hanging over the main entrance. The smell of chalk and new wood filled her senses, and Rose felt something ignite inside her chest. There was her small kingdom, her silent battlefield where she would fight the most important battle of her life, the education of young minds in a world that still resisted change. But as she looked at the empty room, with its desks lined up and the blackboard still clean, Rose could not have imagined that just a few miles away, a man named Nathan Garrett was fighting his own internal battle about whether or not he should allow his son to attend that school. Nathan Garrett rode across his property as the morning sun painted the endless pastures gold. His hands, rough from decades of work, held the reins with the natural ease of someone born in a saddle, but his thoughts galloped faster than any horse. Joshua, his 15-year-old son, had mentioned the new teacher at breakfast with poorly disguised curiosity, and Nathan wrestled with the practical need to educate the boy and the fear of losing him to a world he didn't fully understand. The Garrett house stood alone against the horizon, a solid structure of wood and stone that Nathan had built with his own hands when he was married. Now, 4 years after Sarah's death, the place still carried echoes of children's laughter and whispered conversations by the fireplace. Joshua had grown up amidst the hard work of the ranch, learned to ride before he could properly walk, and knew how to read the clouds and predict storms better than any almanac. But Nathan sensed that the boy yearned for something more, something the vast plains couldn't offer. Meanwhile, at the school, Rose faced her first day. The children arrived in small groups, some barefoot, others dressed in the best their families owned. Mexicans, children of German immigrants, Irish like herself, and the children of the most prosperous ranchers, a human mosaic that reflected the diversity of this American frontier. Rose greeted each child by name, memorizing faces and the stories she read in their curious or suspicious eyes. 8-year-old Maria Fernandez didn't speak English, but her eyes shone with intelligence when Rose used her hands to explain simple concepts. Thomas Brennan, the son of an Irish merchant, read voraciously but hid his books when other boys came near. And there was Emma Carlyle, the general store owner's daughter, who watched in fascination as Rose wrote on the blackboard, as if each letter were a small miracle. During the math lesson, Rose did something that scandalized some and enchanted others. She included girls in the more complex problems. If Mary has $7 and buys fabric for $3.50, how much does she have left to buy ribbon? She asked, ignoring the disapproving whispers that came from the window where some parents were watching. It was mid-afternoon when Joshua Garrett appeared at the school door. Tall for his age, with his father's blue eyes and a determination that reminded her of the mother Rose had never met, he hesitated on the threshold before entering. Rose greeted him with the same kindness she had shown the other children, without hurry, without intrusive questions. She simply offered him a desk and a storybook. "For you can stay as long as you like," she said simply. And Joshua realized he was being treated not as a rebellious child or a problem to be solved, but as a person worthy of respect and patience. When the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Joshua carefully put the book away and whispered an almost inaudible "thank you." Rose nodded and smiled, recognizing in the boy's expression the same hunger for knowledge she herself had carried as a child. That night, as Nathan questioned his son about his day at school, he couldn't have imagined that Rose Murphy had begun to sow something that would change not only Joshua's life, but that of the entire Garrett family. A new purpose in a new land. Autumn arrived in Cheyenne carrying winds that whispered of change. Rose had established a routine that became the comforting rhythm of her days. She arrived at school before sunrise, prepared lessons with meticulous care, and stayed until after sunset, helping the children who needed extra attention. Joshua Garrett became a constant presence, arriving in the middle of the afternoon and staying until the last words were read aloud. It was on one of those golden afternoons that Nathan finally decided to meet the woman who had captured his son's interest. He arrived at the school on his bay horse, taking off his hat even before dismounting, a show of courtesy that Rose noticed immediately. He was a man of remarkable presence, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work, but there was a gentleness in his eyes when he watched his son hunched over a geography book. "Miss Murphy," he greeted her, his deep voice carrying the Texan accent he had never completely lost. "I'm Nathan Garrett. I believe you know my son." Rose stood up from the table where she was grading assignments, smoothing her simple blue cotton dress. "Mr. Garrett, Joshua is one of the most dedicated students I've had the pleasure of teaching." Her voice carried the slight Irish accent that became more pronounced when she was nervous. They talked briefly about Joshua's progress, about the books the boy devoured with an insatiable thirst, about the maps he studied as if they were invitations to distant adventures. Nathan realized that Rose spoke of his son not as an educational project, but as a person who deserved every investment she could offer. "You have a special son," she said, watching Joshua, who pretended to be engrossed in reading, but was clearly listening to every word. "He has a restless mind in the best possible way." Nathan nodded, feeling something shift inside his chest. It had been a long time since he had heard someone speak of Joshua with such genuine admiration. Sarah used to say similar things before. He pushed the thought away before it could fully form. But not everyone in town viewed the changes Rose implemented favorably. Silas Pemberton, the largest landowner in the region, made a point of expressing his disapproval publicly. During city council meetings, he spoke of dangerous ideas and foreign influences that could corrupt the traditional values of the community. Dorothy Carlyle, the general store owner and one of the few women with an active voice in local politics, became a silent defender of Rose. She watched from a distance how the Irish teacher treated her daughter Emma with the same respect and attention she gave to the children of the most prosperous ranchers, and this awakened in her an admiration that grew every day. Eleanor Pemberton, Silas's daughter, also began to discreetly frequent the area around the school. Educated in refined schools in the East, she saw in Rose a potential ally in a battle she was fighting against the suffocating expectations imposed by her father. Eleanor possessed a sharp intelligence and a formal education that Rose admired, but she carried with her the melancholy of one who felt trapped by a name and a fortune she hadn't chosen. One afternoon, when the leaves were beginning to turn yellow and the air carried the promise of winter, Rose found Eleanor waiting for her at the school entrance. The older woman hesitated before speaking, as if weighing each word. "Miss Murphy," she began, her voice educated and careful, "I'd like to talk to you about education. I've been observing your work and I very much admire your methods." Rose sensed that behind the formal words was a deeper request, a desire for connection that Eleanor didn't know how to express. She invited her inside, prepared tea in a kettle she kept at school, and the two women talked until the stars appeared in the sky. In that conversation, the seeds of a friendship were planted that would change not only their lives, but the destiny of all of Cheyenne. An unexpected alliance. The first snowfalls came early that year, covering Cheyenne with a white mantle that transformed the arid landscape into something almost magical. Rose walked through the soft snow to school every morning, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air, carrying firewood to keep the room warm for the children who continued to arrive despite the cold. Joshua now came to school not only in the afternoons, but spent entire mornings engrossed in history and literature books. Nathan, initially reticent about his son's formal education, began to recognize subtle changes in the boy. Joshua questioned more, thought before he spoke, and showed a curiosity about the world that went far beyond the ranch's borders. It was during one of those icy mornings that Eleanor Pemberton appeared at the school carrying a basket covered with damask fabric. Inside, Rose found not only fresh bread and homemade jams, but also books, elegant volumes of poetry and philosophy that Eleanor had brought from her travels to the East. "I thought you could make better use of them than I," Eleanor said. But her eyes revealed a deeper need. She yearned for intellectual conversations, for discussions that went beyond the superficial comments about weather and business that dominated the drawing rooms of Cheyenne. Rose prepared tea, and the two women sat close to the stove, creating a small circle of warmth and intimacy amid the cold that seemed to freeze the world outside. Eleanor began to talk about her education, about the years in Boston where she had studied literature and history, about the frustration of returning to a place where such knowledge was seen as decorative at best or dangerous at worst. "My father," she said, choosing her words carefully, "believes that education is a tool of control. He fears that too much knowledge in the wrong hands could disrupt the natural order of things." Rose nodded, recognizing in the comment echoes of the battles she herself was fighting daily. "And what is your opinion on that?" Eleanor hesitated, looking out the windows where the snow continued to fall in lazy flakes. "I believe that education is liberation, but freedom frightens those who benefit from the imprisonment of others." In that conversation, Eleanor revealed something that had been weighing on her conscience for months. She talked about documents she had found in her father's office, letters that suggested questionable business practices, agreements that favored some ranchers at the expense of others, especially those of Mexican and Irish origin. "They're not crimes," Eleanor quickly clarified, "but they are injustices, manipulations that keep some in prosperity while others struggle unnecessarily." Rose listened in silence, understanding that Eleanor was asking not only for advice, but also for courage. The daughter of Silas Pemberton was discovering that carrying a respected name didn't always mean carrying pride in that name. Joshua, who had arrived earlier that day, and overheard part of the conversation unintentionally, remained silent until the two women finished talking. When Eleanor left, he approached Rose with a thoughtful expression. "Miss Murphy," he said, his voice more mature than his 15 years should allow, "does doing the right thing sometimes mean going against what everyone expects of us?" Rose looked at the boy for a long moment before answering, "Joshua, doing the right thing almost always means that. The question is whether we have enough courage to endure the consequences." That night, as the snow continued to fall on Cheyenne, 3 people in different houses contemplated the same fundamental question. How far were they willing to go to defend what they believed in? A community's heartspring arrived with promises whispered by the warm wind that melted the last snows. Rose planted a small garden behind the school, teaching the children about natural sciences through the miracle of sprouting seeds. Joshua brought vegetable seedlings from his father's ranch, and together they created a space that became a natural extension of the classroom. It was around this time that the problems began to manifest more directly. Silas Pemberton, bothered by the reports he received about the progressive methods of the Irish teacher, decided to take more forceful measures. He began to pressure other members of the school board, arguing that Rose was filling the children's heads with inappropriate ideas and destabilizing the community's natural hierarchy. The tension grew when Rose organized an event that scandalized part of the town, a presentation where girls recited poems by famous authors and demonstrated advanced math skills. For some, it was a wonderful revelation. For others, an affront to traditional values. Nathan watched the presentation from the back row, observing Joshua help the younger children with discreet but evident pride. When Emma Carlyle perfectly recited a poem by Emily Dickinson, Nathan saw tears in Dorothy Carlyle's eyes and understood that something important was happening in that small school. After the event, Nathan approached Rose as she was organizing the materials. "Miss Murphy," he said, taking off his hat in a deference that had become habitual, "I'd like to thank you for what you've done for Joshua, and for the other children too." Rose looked up from the papers she was organizing, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Joshua is an exceptional young man, Mr. Garrett. I'm just trying to help him discover his own possibilities. Perhaps," Nathan hesitated, rarely feeling insecure with words, "perhaps you could have dinner with us on Sunday. Joshua has been talking a lot about your classes, and I'd like to get to know you better." The invitation hung in the air between them, like a delicate bridge that any wrong word could destroy. Rose felt a blush rise to her cheeks, not just from the invitation, but from the respectful way Nathan made it, without presuming a positive response. "That would be an honor," she replied simply. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her regular visits to the school, always bringing books or materials she wasn't using. During one of these visits, she revealed a disturbing discovery to Rose. Her father was planning to publicly question Rose's employment, alleging that she did not meet the community's moral standards. "He found out about your Catholic faith," Eleanor said in a low voice. "In a predominantly Protestant community, he intends to use that against you." Rose felt her stomach clench, but she showed no surprise. She had expected this moment would eventually come. "And what is your position on that, Eleanor?" "My position," Eleanor replied with a firmness that surprised them both, "is that a person's faith is a matter between them and God, and that judging someone by their religious denomination is exactly the kind of small-mindedness we should be trying to overcome." Rose smiled, recognizing in her friend a courage that was being forged in the heat of the circumstances. "Then we'll have to prepare for some confrontations, won't we?" "It seems so," Eleanor agreed. "But we don't have to face them alone." That afternoon, for the first time since she had arrived in Cheyenne, Rose felt she had found not only a purpose, but people willing to fight alongside her for that purpose. And somehow that made all the difference. A life-changing dinner Sunday arrived, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and the delicious anxiety that accompanies the first important dates. Rose chose her best dress, a dark green that highlighted her eyes, and walked the 3 miles that separated the town from the Garrett Ranch, carrying an apple pie she had baked in the boarding house kitchen. The ranch sprawled across the landscape like a testament to Nathan's dedication over the years he had spent there. The main house, built with noble wood and local stone, radiated solidity and permanence. Well-tended gardens surrounded the building, and Rose could see feminine touches that had survived the absence, rose bushes pruned with care and herb beds that someone had planted with knowledge and love. Joshua greeted her on the porch, visibly nervous but happy. "Miss Murphy, Dad is just finishing getting ready. He hasn't had visitors in a long time." Rose nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. There was sensitivity in Joshua's comment, a discreet protection of his father that revealed the emotional maturity she had observed in the boy. Nathan appeared moments later, wearing an impeccably ironed white shirt and dark trousers that were clearly reserved for special occasions. He had shaved with care and combed his hair, and Rose realized he was just as nervous as she was. "Miss Murphy," he greeted her, the formality not quite hiding the pleasure of welcoming her. "Welcome to our home." Dinner was served at a polished wooden table where the history of many family meals could be felt. Nathan proved to be a competent cook, preparing roast beef with vegetables he grew himself. The conversation flowed naturally, covering topics ranging from the changes they were observing in Cheyenne to childhood memories of each of them. Rose talked about Ireland with the sweet longing of one who loves but cannot return, describing the green hills and stone houses, the sound of rain on thatched roofs, and the stories her grandmother told by the fireplace. Nathan shared memories of Texas, the early years as a forest ranger, the decisions that had brought him to Wyoming in search of a more stable life. Joshua listened to everything with attention, asking intelligent questions and contributing observations that revealed how he had absorbed Rose's lessons on thinking critically and questioning respectfully. For Rose, it was comforting to see that what she taught at school found an echo in the family environment. "Miss Murphy," Nathan said during dessert, "Joshua told me about some comments that have been circulating in town about your teaching methods." Rose nodded, knowing this moment would come. "Some parents have expressed concerns, it's true. They believe I am being excessively inclusive." "And what does excessively inclusive mean to them?" Nathan asked, his tone careful but clearly interested in her answer. "Teaching advanced math to girls, including Mexican children in the same activities as American children, using books that present different perspectives on history and society." Rose paused. "And apparently being Catholic in a Protestant community." Nathan was silent for a moment, processing the information. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a conviction that surprised even Joshua. "Miss Murphy, during the years I spent as a forest ranger, I learned that there are two kinds of people: those who judge others by the color of their skin, religion or origin, and those who judge by their actions and character. I've always preferred the second kind." Rose felt something shift inside her chest, an emotion she couldn't fully name. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. That means a great deal to me." "Nathan," he corrected softly, "I think we've passed the point of excessive formality." As the afternoon began to wane, Nathan insisted on accompanying her back to town. They rode side by side along the familiar paths, talking about everything and nothing, discovering affinities and differences that made each other's company more and more precious. At the boarding house door, Nathan hesitated before speaking. "Rose," he said, using her name for the first time, "I want you to know that whatever happens with the pressures you've been facing, you will have our support. Mine and Joshua's." Rose looked at the man before her, strong, honest, kind in a way that didn't diminish his masculinity, and knew that something fundamental had changed that day, not just between them, but inside herself. "Thank you, Nathan," she replied. "That means more than you can imagine." As she watched him ride back to the ranch under the first stars, Rose understood that she had found in Cheyenne much more than a job. She had found a home. The silent revolution Monday arrived, bringing with it heavy clouds that mirrored the growing tension in town. Rose had barely started class when Harold Winters appeared at the school door, accompanied by Silas Pemberton and 2 other school board members. Harold's formal expression and Pemberton's cold smile announced trouble. "Miss Murphy," Harold said, his voice carrying forced authority, "we need to talk about some concerns that have arisen in the community." Rose asked Joshua to supervise the other children and went out to talk to the men on the school porch. The spring wind played with the leaves of nearby trees, creating a delicate contrast to the rigidity of the confrontation that was unfolding. Pemberton got straight to the point, laying out the accusations with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every word. He questioned her excessively progressive methods, her inappropriate favoritism of children from immigrant families, and finally, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he mentioned her religious affiliation incompatible with the values of the majority of the community. Rose listened to everything in silence, her hands clasped in front of her body, her erect posture revealing a dignity that no accusation could shake. When Pemberton finished, she waited a moment before answering, choosing her words with the care of one who knows they can define her future. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice calm but firm, "during the months I have been here, I have dedicated myself entirely to the education of the children of Cheyenne. I have taught math, history, literature, and science with the same care and dedication to all students, regardless of their background. If that is considered controversial, then perhaps the problem is not in my methods, but in the perspective of those who judge them." A murmur went through the room. Some people nodded in approval. Others whispered among themselves with disapproving expressions. The silence was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Dorothy Carlyle walked toward the school with evident determination, followed by Eleanor Pemberton. The look of surprise on Silas's face when he saw his own daughter approaching was almost comical. "Gentlemen," Dorothy said, joining the group with the natural authority of one who was used to being heard, "I hope you are not bothering our teacher during school hours." Eleanor positioned herself beside Rose, a symbolic gesture that went unnoticed by no one. "Father," she said, her voice polite but unyielding, "perhaps we should discuss these issues more appropriately, instead of intimidating a dedicated teacher." The tension in the air was palpable. Pemberton looked at his daughter with a mix of surprise and irritation, clearly not expecting such public opposition. Harold Winters shifted his weight from one foot to the other, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Eleanor," Pemberton said, his tone sharp, "this is not a matter for women to get involved in." "Education is not a matter for women," Dorothy retorted, raising an eyebrow. "An interesting perspective, considering that we are the ones who raise and educate these children from birth." Rose watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She didn't want other people to suffer consequences for defending her, but at the same time, she felt strengthened by the unexpected support. It was then that Nathan arrived, riding quickly to the school. He dismounted with economical movements and joined the group, assessing the situation with the experienced eyes of one who had faced many tensions throughout his life. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, addressing Rose but keeping his eyes on the board members. Pemberton straightened up, clearly irritated by the growing interference. "Mr. Garrett, this is an official matter of the school board. Anything that affects the education of my son interests me," Nathan replied calmly. "And I have only observed improvements in Joshua's learning since Miss Murphy took over the school." What followed was a heated discussion where the divisions in the community became clear. On one side, Pemberton and his supporters defended a traditional and restrictive view of education. On the other, a growing group of people who had witnessed the benefits of Rose's methods. When the board members finally left, promising future discussions, Rose found herself surrounded by allies whose loyalty deeply moved her. Dorothy, Eleanor, and Nathan formed a protective circle around her, and she understood that the battle for Cheyenne's education had just begun. "Well," said Eleanor with a determined smile, "it looks like we're going to have to get more organized." And it was in that moment that an alliance was born that would change not only the destiny of the school, but the future of the entire community. The public stance. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, in the assembly hall of the municipal building. The news spread through the town like wildfire, and when the night arrived, half of Cheyenne was present. Rose entered the room with the serene dignity of one who had spent the entire week preparing not only intellectually, but spiritually for that moment. Nathan and Joshua sat in the front row, a silent but eloquent demonstration of support. Dorothy Carlyle occupied a strategic place in the middle of the room, from where she could observe the community's reactions. Eleanor Pemberton, in a gesture of courage that surprised even Rose, sat beside the teacher at the table designated for the accused. Silas Pemberton presided over the meeting with the pomp of one who considered himself the natural leader of the community. At his side, Harold Winters and two other board members displayed expressions that ranged from embarrassment to determination. The light of the oil lamps created dramatic shadows in the room, giving the scene a solemn air of judgment. Pemberton began by laying out his accusations with carefully constructed rhetoric. He spoke of preserving traditional values, protecting childhood innocence, and maintaining community harmony. His words were skillful, designed to sound reasonable even when they promoted exclusion and intolerance. Rose listened to everything in silence, her hands calmly clasped on the table. When it was her turn to respond, she stood up with the natural grace of one who had learned from an early age to face adversity with dignity. "Gentlemen of the board, citizens of Cheyenne," she began, her clear voice reaching every corner of the room. "I came to this community with a single purpose, to offer the children the best possible education within the available resources." She spoke about each child she had taught, mentioning specific progress without ever exposing deficiencies. She described how Maria Fernandez now read in English, how Thomas Brennan had discovered a passion for geography, how Emma Carlisle showed an exceptional aptitude for mathematics. Her words painted a picture of children blossoming under dedicated care and methods that respected their individuality. "If teaching all children with equal dedication is controversial," she said, her voice gaining strength, "if including girls in science classes is radical, if treating Catholics and Protestants with equal respect is dangerous, then I accept these accusations with pride." A murmur went through the room. Some people nodded in approval, others whispered among themselves with disapproving expressions. It was then that Joshua Garrett surprised everyone. The 15-year-old boy stood up without permission and walked to the center of the room. Nathan tried to stop him, but Joshua motioned for understanding. "May I speak?" he asked, his voice firm despite his youth. Pemberton hesitated, clearly irritated by the interruption, but the audience waited, curious. "Before Miss Murphy arrived," Joshua said, looking directly at the board members, "I thought books were a waste of time. I thought I only needed to know enough to take care of the cattle and the land. But she showed me that there are entire worlds waiting to be discovered. She taught me to think, not just to memorize. She taught me that asking questions is as important as knowing answers." He paused, took a deep breath and continued. "If that's what you call dangerous, then I hope more children have the chance to run that danger." The silence that followed was broken by applause that began with Dorothy Carlyle and spread through the room. Not everyone applauded. There were scowling faces and expressions of disapproval, but the support was substantial and evident. Eleanor Pemberton then stood up, and her intervention was even more impactful than Joshua's. "Father," she said, her voice trembling slightly but determined, "I have been silent for too long about many things, but I cannot remain silent when I see a dedicated and talented woman being persecuted for having the courage to treat all children as human beings worthy of education." Silas Pemberton paled, clearly not expecting his daughter to confront him so directly in public. "Miss Murphy," Eleanor continued, now addressing the teacher, "brought to our community something we didn't know was missing. The vision that education is a right, not a privilege reserved for a few." The meeting continued for 2 more hours, with residents taking sides on both sides of the issue. When it was finally time to vote, the result was narrow but decisive. Rose Murphy would remain as Cheyenne's teacher. Pemberton accepted the defeat with evident ill will, but even he could not ignore that a significant majority of the community had taken a stand in favor of the Irish teacher. When the meeting ended and people began to disperse, Rose found herself surrounded by supporters who congratulated her and offered encouragement. But it was the moment when Nathan approached her that touched her most. "Rose," he said simply, "I'm proud to know you." And in those simple words she heard much more than professional admiration. A new chapter begins. Summer arrived in Cheyenne with all the force of the American plains, bringing heat that shimmered on the horizon and golden afternoons that seemed suspended in time. The official school year had ended for vacation, but Rose organized volunteer classes 3 times a week, serving children whose parents worked and had nowhere to stay, as well as adults who wanted to learn to read and write. Nathan became a constant presence in these summer classes, initially under the pretext that Joshua needed supervision, but gradually taking on responsibilities, that revealed his genuine interest in the community's education. He helped fix school furniture, transported heavy materials, and occasionally attended classes with an attention that surprised everyone, especially himself. Eleanor also became a regular collaborator, offering literature and etiquette classes for the older girls. She had found in Rose not only a friend, but a cause that gave purpose to her refined education. Together, they created a program that met the specific needs of the frontier community, balancing practical knowledge with formal education. It was during one of those golden afternoons that Nathan and Rose found themselves alone at the school for the first time. The children had left, Eleanor had returned home, and Joshua had gone to get water from the well. Nathan was fixing a desk with the meticulousness of one who found pleasure in a job well done with his hands, while Rose organized books on an improvised shelf. "Rose," he said without looking up from the wood he was sanding, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course," she replied, continuing to arrange the volumes but paying full attention to his voice. "Have you never thought about getting married? A woman like you, intelligent, dedicated, beautiful." He hesitated, as if the words were more difficult to shape than the wood under his hands. Rose stopped what she was doing, feeling her heart race. "In Ireland there was a young man," she said slowly, "but he wanted a wife who would stay at home, taking care only of the house and the children that would come. When he found out I dreamed of teaching, that I wanted to use my education for something greater, he thought I had inappropriate ambitions for a woman." Nathan stopped sanding and looked at her. "And you? What did you think about that?" "I thought that true love should support our dreams, not try to diminish them," Rose replied, meeting his eyes. "I preferred to be alone than to be with someone who would make me less than I am." Nathan nodded slowly, understanding more than the words revealed. "Sarah," he said, mentioning his deceased wife for the first time since Rose had known him, "always said that a strong woman doesn't make a man weak. On the contrary, she challenges him to be better." "She seemed to be a wise woman," Rose said softly. "She was," Nathan confirmed, "and I think she would have liked you very much." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings that neither of them was yet ready to fully explore. But there was tenderness in the observation, a recognition that Rose could occupy a place in Nathan's heart without diminishing Sarah's memory. Joshua chose that moment to return with the water, breaking the intimate moment with his noisy arrival. But he stopped at the door, watching his father and the teacher, and a slow smile spread across his young face. There were things that didn't need to be explained, even to a 15-year-old boy. "Dad," he said, placing the bucket of water on a table, "I think we're going to be late for dinner." Nathan consulted his pocket watch and confirmed that time had passed faster than he had realized. "Rose," he said, "would you like to have dinner with us again? I promise this time I won't question you about educational methods." Rose laughed, a melodious sound that filled the empty school. "I'd love to, Nathan, but only if you let me help in the kitchen. It's not fair that you do all the work. It's a deal," he said, and his voice carried a happiness that Joshua hadn't heard in years. As they walked together toward the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Rose walked between Nathan and Joshua, feeling part of something bigger than herself, a family that was forming naturally, without haste, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just in their individual lives, but in the story they were writing together, a test of true love. Autumn returned to Cheyenne with its whispering winds and leaves that danced in golden swirls. Rose had established a comforting routine that intertwined her life with the Garretts in a natural and organic way. 3 times a week she had dinner at the ranch, helping Nathan in the kitchen, while Joshua studied or took care of the horses. On weekends, the 3 of them often had picnics in the pastures, where Rose discovered she had a natural affinity for rural life that surprised her. Eleanor continued to be a constant presence at school and had become Rose's close confidant. During one of their afternoon conversations, she revealed that Silas Pemberton was planning a new strategy to question Rose's permanence in the town. This time, however, his intentions were more subtle and potentially more dangerous. "He's spreading rumors," Eleanor said, her voice filled with embarrassment at having to be the bearer of such news, "about you and Nathan, suggesting that there's impropriety in your relationship." Rose felt the blood rush to her cheeks, not from shame but from indignation. "And what kind of impropriety does he allege?" that you're trying to seduce a wealthy widower to secure your position in the community. Eleanor hesitated before continuing, and that you're using Joshua to achieve that. The accusation was as ridiculous as it was offensive, but Rose understood the effectiveness of such a strategy in a small community, where reputations could be destroyed by malicious whispers. More importantly, she was concerned about the impact this could have on Nathan and Joshua. "Eleanor," she said after a moment's reflection, "I need to talk to Nathan about this. He deserves to know what's being said." "I completely agree," Eleanor replied. "And Rose, don't let my father's gossip affect something that is clearly special between you." That night, Rose walked to the ranch with slower steps than usual, mentally organizing how to approach the delicate subject. She found Nathan in the barn, tending to a horse with a leg injury. There was something comforting in the competent way he handled the animal, speaking in low, calming tones as he cleaned the wound. "Nathan," she said when he finished the treatment, "we need to talk about something important." The seriousness in her voice made him look at her with full attention. "What happened?" Rose told him about Pemberton's rumors, observing the expressions that succeeded each other on Nathan's face. Surprise, irritation, and finally, a steely determination that she recognized from previous moments when he had defended important principles. "Rose," he said when she finished, stepping closer, "I hope you know I don't give any importance to malicious gossip, but I'm worried about the effect this could have on you and your position at school." "That's exactly what I'm worried about too," she admitted. "Not for me, but for you and Joshua. You don't deserve to be dragged into these conflicts because of me." Nathan was silent for a long moment, studying her face under the soft light of the barn lantern. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an intensity that made Rose's heart race. "Rose, for the 4 years since Sarah died, I didn't think it would be possible to feel what I'm feeling now. You brought light back into our house, a renewed purpose for Joshua, and for me," he paused, searching for the right words. "For you," she encouraged softly, "for me you brought the possibility of happiness again. And I won't allow Silas Pemberton or anyone else to destroy that with lies and innuendos." The moment was interrupted by Joshua's arrival, who stopped at the barn entrance when he sensed the tension in the air. "Is there a problem?" he asked, looking alternately at the 3 adults. Nathan looked at his son, then at Rose, and made a decision. "Joshua, come here. There's something we want to talk to you about." The 3 of them sat on a pile of hay, and Nathan explained the situation with the direct honesty that characterized his relationship with his son. Joshua listened to everything with impressive maturity, asking practical questions about how this could affect the school and Rose's position. "Dad," he finally said, "since Miss Murphy, Rose, arrived here, our house has felt like a home again." You smile again. "I'm learning things I never imagined wanting to know, and the 3 of us, well, we feel like a family." He looked directly at Rose. "If some people have a problem with that, the problem is theirs, not ours." Nathan smiled, proud of his son's wisdom and loyalty. "Then we're in agreement," he said. "We're not going to let gossip change what we're building here." Rose felt tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "You two, you're the best people I've ever met." And that night, in the barn fragrant with hay and warmed by the soft light of the lantern, an unconventional but deeply loving family sealed its commitment to face the coming challenges together. A proposal, a threat, and a choice. The first snow of winter arrived on a Saturday morning, turning Cheyenne into a fairy tale of crystal and silence. Rose watched the flakes fall outside the school window, where she had arrived early to prepare Christmas decorations with the children who would come in the afternoon for the voluntary weekend activities. Eleanor arrived shortly after, carrying a basket of craft materials and a smile brighter than the light reflected in the snow. There was something different in her expression, a contained happiness that Rose recognized immediately. "Eleanor," she said, interrupting the organization of the materials, "you look radiant today. Did something special happen?" Eleanor blushed delicately, confirming Rose's suspicions. "Actually, yes. I received a letter yesterday. From William Hendricks, the literature professor I met during my trip to Denver last month." Rose smiled, remembering the mentions Eleanor had made of the young educator who had given lectures at the teachers' conference she had attended. "And what did Mr. Hendricks write?" "He's coming to Cheyenne next month," Eleanor said, barely able to contain her joy, "to learn about our educational methods. He said he was impressed with the descriptions I gave of the work we're doing here." Rose realized there was more to the visit than professional interest, but she didn't want to press her friend. Instead, she focused on Eleanor's evident joy and the broader meaning of the visit. "It will be wonderful to have another experienced educator observing our methods," Rose said, "and I'm sure he'll be impressed with what you've contributed to the education of the young women in town." The children began to arrive at noon, bringing with them the cheerful energy that always accompanied special activities. Joshua appeared with Nathan, who had offered to help with the preparations. Maria Fernandez brought her 2 younger siblings. Thomas Brennan arrived with a book under his arm as always, and Emma Carlyle came accompanied by her mother, who wanted to observe the activities. The afternoon passed in an atmosphere of quiet celebration, with children creating ornaments with simple but creative materials. Rose watched Nathan help the younger boys with basic carpentry projects, his infinite patience contrasting with his large, calloused hands. There was something deeply touching about seeing that strong and reserved man interact so tenderly with children who were not his own. Eleanor coordinated a group of older girls in making cloth dolls, teaching sewing stitches, while telling stories about Christmases she had spent in Boston. Dorothy Carlyle watched everything with evident approval, occasionally offering practical suggestions based on her experience as a mother and a merchant. It was when the activities were ending that Silas Pemberton appeared at the school. His arrival brought with it an immediate tension, visible in the way conversation ceased, and the adults present instinctively positioned themselves protectively in front of the children. "Eleanor," he said, addressing his daughter with an authority that allowed no questions, "I need to talk to you immediately." Eleanor straightened up, and Rose realized that the months of personal growth had strengthened her friend in ways that Silas himself had not yet fully understood. "Father," Eleanor replied with cold politeness, "I'm busy at the moment. If you want to talk, you can wait until we're finished here." The surprise on Silas's face was evident. He was accustomed to his daughter's immediate obedience and clearly didn't know how to react to her polite but firm resistance. Nathan took a step forward, positioning himself so he could intervene if necessary. "Pemberton," he said with the calm that characterized his tense interactions, "perhaps it would be better to discuss family matters at home." "Garrett," Silas retorted, his irritation evident, "this is none of your business." "Anything that happens in my son's presence is my business," Nathan replied, maintaining his respectful but firm tone. It was then that Joshua surprised everyone again. The boy approached Eleanor with a determination that reminded her of his father at his best. "Miss Pemberton," he said formally, "if you need anything, we'll be here." It was a simple declaration, but it was full of meaning. Joshua was publicly offering his family's protection to Eleanor, recognizing her as part of his circle of important people. Eleanor smiled at the boy with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Joshua. That means a lot to me." Silas looked around the room, assessing the expressions of those present, and seemed to understand that he was at a disadvantage, not just in terms of people, but of public opinion. With a short nod to Eleanor, he withdrew, leaving behind a tense but victorious atmosphere. "Well," Dorothy Carlyle said, breaking the silence, "I think decorating time is over. How about some hot chocolate for everyone?" And as they prepared the warm drink and the children returned to their cheerful chatter, Rose understood that she had witnessed something important. The community they had built around the school was stronger than she had imagined, capable of protecting its members from intimidation and external pressure. More importantly, she saw in Joshua's behavior, in Eleanor's courage, and in Nathan's silent loyalty, signs that the work she was doing in Cheyenne went far beyond formal education. She was helping to create better, braver, and more compassionate people, and that made all the challenges worthwhile. A new beginning. January brought with it the most intense cold Cheyenne had experienced in years. Snow piled up against the school windows, creating a white and silent world that seemed to isolate the small community from the rest of the universe. Rose arrived every morning before dawn, lighting the stove and preparing the room to receive the children brave enough to face the cold in search of an education. William Hendricks arrived on one of those mornings when the snow was falling so thickly that you could barely see more than a few feet ahead. He was a tall and elegant man, with wavy brown hair and intelligent eyes that observed everything with genuine interest. Rose received him at the station along with Eleanor, who had insisted on accompanying her despite the adverse weather. The transformation in Eleanor since the letter's arrival had been remarkable. There was a new liveliness in her movements, a confidence that radiated from within and was reflected in every gesture. When William stepped off the train and his eyes met hers, Rose witnessed one of those magical moments where two souls recognize in each other something they had been looking for. "Miss Pemberton," William said, taking Eleanor's gloved hand and holding it a moment longer than formal etiquette required. "It's a pleasure to see you again." "Mr. Hendricks," Eleanor replied, the blush on her cheeks not caused only by the cold. "Welcome to Cheyenne. I hope our little school doesn't disappoint you." Over the next 3 days, William observed the classes with meticulous attention, taking notes and asking insightful questions that revealed not only pedagogical knowledge, but genuine admiration for what he was witnessing. He was particularly impressed with how Rose and Eleanor had created an environment where children of different ethnic and social backgrounds learned together, supporting each other instead of competing destructively. "In Boston," he commented during a dinner at the Garrett's house, "the most progressive schools still maintain divisions that you have naturally overcome here. It's truly remarkable." Nathan, who had proven to be a gracious host, smiled modestly. "The credit is all Rose's and Eleanor's. They have transformed our little school into a true institution of learning." "Not just the school," added Joshua, who had learned to participate in adult conversations with intelligent comments. "They have transformed the entire community. People think differently now, they treat each other better." It was on the third night that William asked to speak with Eleanor privately. Rose and Nathan, understanding the need for privacy, took Joshua for a walk through the snow-covered pastures, leaving the two young people alone in the living room. When they returned an hour later, they found Eleanor and William sitting near the fireplace, their hands intertwined, talking in low, intimate tones. The happiness radiated from Eleanor so clearly that Rose felt tears of joy in her eyes. "Rose," Eleanor said when the others entered, "William has made a wonderful invitation." William stood up, showing the formal courtesy that characterized educated men of the East. "Miss Murphy, Mr. Garrett, I asked Eleanor to come with me to Boston, where she could help establish an educational program based on the methods I observed here." "And?" Rose encouraged, though she already knew by Eleanor's expression what the answer would be. "And I accepted," Eleanor said, radiant, "but only if William agrees to return to Cheyenne with us in the fall. We want to establish a normal school here, to train teachers who can take these methods to other frontier communities." Rose felt a mix of joy for her friend and concern for her own situation. Eleanor had become not only an indispensable collaborator, but a sister of the heart. Her departure, even if temporary, would leave a significant void. Nathan, observing Rose's expression, approached and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Rose," he said softly, "changes are sometimes necessary for good things to grow even more." "I know," she replied, forcing a smile, "and I'm genuinely happy for Eleanor. She deserves all the happiness in the world." That night, after William returned to the boarding house and Eleanor left for home, Rose stayed in the Garrett's kitchen, helping to wash the dishes. Joshua had retired to study, leaving Rose and Nathan alone for the first time in weeks. "Rose," Nathan said as he dried a platter with careful movements, "there's something I've wanted to discuss with you." "What is it?" she asked, feeling her heart race at the seriousness in his voice. Nathan put the platter aside and turned to face her fully. "During these months, watching you with Joshua, seeing your dedication to the children, the way you've brought light and renewed purpose to our home, well, I've started to think about the future." Rose waited, feeling that they were approaching a moment that would define their lives. "I'd like you to consider becoming more than a frequent visitor here. I'd like you to consider becoming a permanent part of this family." The words hung between them, full of promises and possibilities. Rose looked at the man before her, strong, gentle, honest, and knew that her answer would change everything. But before she could answer, they heard footsteps on the porch and voices outside. Someone was arriving, and by the urgency of the sounds, they were bringing important news. The moment of decision would have to wait. A final stand. The door opened with force, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the agitated figure of Harold Winters. His face was red not only from the cold, but from the evident turmoil that dominated his habitually controlled expression. "Nathan Rose," he said, struggling to catch his breath. "I only need to know what happened at the emergency city council meeting." Rose and Nathan exchanged glances, filled with apprehension. The intimate moment they had shared was suspended by the urgency of the situation. "What meeting?" Nathan asked, offering Harold a chair and pouring him a glass of water. "Silas Pemberton called an extraordinary meeting tonight," Harold explained, still out of breath. "He brought someone from outside, a territorial education inspector who has very specific opinions on how schools should be run." Rose felt her stomach clench. "And what are those opinions?" Harold hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the news he was bringing. The inspector claims that the progressive methods implemented here are incompatible with territorial educational standards. He said that mixing children of different ethnic backgrounds can create social instability, and that teachers must stick strictly to approved curricula. "And the board's decision?" Nathan asked, though his voice already revealed that he feared the answer. "They voted," Harold paused painfully. "They voted to implement a period of strict observation of the school. Rose will have to follow a specific curriculum, she will be monitored weekly, and any deviation from the standards will result in immediate dismissal." The silence that followed was deafening. Rose felt as if the world had stopped spinning around her. Everything she had worked for, all the children whose lives she had touched, all the progress they had achieved together, everything was now under threat. "There's more," Harold continued, his voice filled with sorrow. "The inspector said that any community member who supports unauthorized methods will be considered in disagreement with territorial policies." Nathan immediately understood the implication. Not only was Rose being threatened, but anyone who publicly supported her could face consequences. Joshua appeared at the kitchen entrance, drawn by the tense voices. "What's happening?" he asked, looking alternately at the three adults. Rose was the first to regain her composure. She stood up from her chair with the dignity that characterized her in the most difficult moments, and walked to the window, looking at the snow that continued to fall under the moonlight. "Joshua," she said without turning around, "do you remember when we talked about doing the right thing even when it's hard?" "Yes," the boy replied, realizing it was something important. "Well, one of those moments has arrived for me." Rose turned, facing the three men with a resolution that surprised even herself. "I can't teach under constant threats. I can't educate children with the fear that every word I say will be judged by people who have never set foot in a classroom." "Rose," Nathan began, taking a step toward her. "No, Nathan," she interrupted gently but firmly. "Let me finish. Throughout my life, I've learned that sometimes we have to make difficult choices to protect what is most important." She looked at Joshua, then at Nathan, and finally at Harold. "What is most important here is not me or my position. It's the children. And if my presence is causing division in the community, if it's creating an environment where fear replaces learning, then perhaps it's time for me to leave." "No!" The word came out of Joshua with surprising force. "Miss Murphy, Rose, you can't leave. You've changed everything here. You've changed me. You've changed Dad. You've changed the way people think." Nathan approached Rose, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "Joshua is right, Rose. You can't just give up." "I'm not giving up," she replied calmly. "I'm recognizing that sometimes the best way to protect something we love is to temporarily step away." Harold, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. "Rose," he said, "there's something else you need to know." During the meeting, several people spoke out against the decision. Dorothy Carlyle, the Brennans, the Fernandez family. Half the town opposed the new restrictions. Rose nodded, touched by the support but not surprised. "And that makes everything even harder, Harold. I don't want these good people to suffer consequences for supporting me." It was then that Nathan did something that surprised everyone. He approached Rose, took her hands in his and spoke with a passion he rarely showed publicly. "Rose Murphy," he said, "for 4 years I lived in a fog of sadness and responsibility. You brought color back to my life, hope for my son's future, and," he hesitated for only a moment, "love for my heart that I thought I would never feel again. Rose felt tears in her eyes, moved by Nathan's public declaration. "If you leave," he continued, "we won't just lose an exceptional teacher. I will lose the woman I love. And Joshua will lose the only mother figure he's known since Sarah's death." The silence that followed was filled with pure emotion. Harold looked at the floor, clearly touched by the scene he was witnessing. Joshua smiled through tears he was trying to hold back. Rose looked at Nathan, seeing in him not just the man she had come to love, but a partner who was willing to fight alongside her for the values they shared. "Nathan," she said softly, "are you asking me to stay and fight?" "I'm asking you to stay and build something better," he replied. "I'm asking you to marry me, and together we will face whatever storm comes." Rose closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision that would change not only her life but the destiny of the entire community. When she opened them again, there was a steely determination in them that Nathan recognized and admired. "Then let the storm come," she said. "We'll face it together." And in that moment, in the warm kitchen of a ranch house in the middle of a Wyoming winter, a small, silent revolution was declared. The legacy of Rose Murphy Garrett Spring arrived in Cheyenne like a symphony of rebirth, carrying with it the scents of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Rose woke up on a Saturday morning, 3 months after that decisive night in the Garrett's kitchen, feeling a deep peace she had learned to recognize as genuine happiness. The wedding had taken place in a simple but memorable ceremony, officiated by the Methodist pastor and blessed by the Catholic priest who visited Cheyenne monthly, a symbol of the union that Rose and Nathan represented, not just between two people, but between two traditions that had learned to respect each other. Dorothy Carlyle had decorated the church with flowers that the entire community contributed, and Eleanor, who had returned from Boston especially for the occasion accompanied by William, served as a bridesmaid. The little school had been transformed during the spring months. The territorial inspector, confronted with irrefutable evidence of the educational progress achieved by the children of Cheyenne, was forced to admit that the unconventional methods were producing superior results to those of traditional schools. More importantly, a petition signed by 3/4 of the community demanding Rose's retention as a teacher made it impossible to ignore the popular will. Silas Pemberton, isolated in his opposition and facing increasing pressure from other ranchers who had witnessed the benefits of inclusive education, finally bowed to the inevitability of change. In a private conversation with Rose, he even admitted that his daughter Eleanor had become a stronger and more independent woman since she began working at the school. Now, as Rose prepared breakfast in the kitchen that had truly become hers, she watched through the window as Joshua taught basic math to 3 Mexican children whose parents worked on the ranch. The boy, now 16, had developed a passion for education that blended perfectly with his gentle nature and natural intelligence. "Good morning, Mrs. Garrett," Nathan said, entering the kitchen and wrapping his arms around her from behind, planting a soft kiss on her neck. "Good morning, husband," she replied, still surprised by the ease with which the words came and the happiness they brought. They had established a routine that honored both the needs of the ranch and the school. Rose continued teaching during the week, but now 3 afternoons were dedicated to classes at the ranch itself, where she served not only children who lived too far from town, but also adults who wanted to learn to read and write. Eleanor and William had returned in the fall as promised, establishing the territory's first normal school in the new building that the community had collectively built. Young people from neighboring communities came to Cheyenne to learn the educational methods that Rose and Eleanor had developed, and then took those techniques back to their own towns. During breakfast, Joshua brought news that filled Rose with particular pride. "Rose," he said, using the name he had naturally adopted after the wedding, "yesterday I received a letter from the university in Denver. They have accepted my application for the education program." Nathan smiled, proud of the son who had grown into a young man of solid principles. "When do you plan to start?" "In the fall," Joshua replied. "But I want to spend the summers here, helping at the school and learning more about educational administration. My dream is to return and help expand the program to the entire territory." Rose felt tears of joy in her eyes. Seeing Joshua discover his passion for education and decide to dedicate his life to helping others was one of the greatest rewards she could imagine. During the afternoon, While Nathan tended to the horses and Joshua studied, Rose walked to the small cemetery where Sarah Garrett rested. It was a ritual she had adopted in the first months of her marriage, not out of obligation, but out of respect and gratitude for the woman who had loved Nathan first and laid the foundation for the man of integrity she had learned to love. "Sarah," she said softly, arranging wildflowers on the grave, "I hope you approve of the changes I've brought to Nathan and Joshua's lives. I promise to take care of them with the same love you would have given." A gentle breeze moved the leaves of the nearby trees, and Rose chose to interpret that as approval. That night, as the Garrett family gathered for dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dorothy Carlyle appeared carrying an official letter with territorial government seals. "Rose," she said with barely contained excitement, "this arrived for you today." Rose opened the letter with slightly trembling hands, reading in silence while Nathan and Joshua waited anxiously. "Well," Nathan encouraged, "it's from the Territorial Department of Education," Rose said, her voice filled with wonder. "They want to name our school an official model for the territory and—" She stopped, almost not believing what she was reading. "They are offering federal funds to expand the program and build a larger school." The silence was broken by Joshua's shouts of joy and Dorothy's applause. Nathan simply smiled, embracing his wife with evident pride. "Do you know what this means?" Rose said, looking at each of them. "It means we've proven that inclusive education not only works but is superior. It means that other children, in other communities, will have the same opportunities that we've managed to create here." Later that night, when Dorothy had left and Joshua had gone to study, Rose and Nathan sat on the porch, watching the stars shine over the endless plains. "Nathan," Rose said, resting her head on her husband's shoulder, "sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed since I came to Cheyenne." "Our life has changed," he corrected her softly. "And you know what else? I think we're just getting started." Rose nodded, feeling the profound truth in his words. They had built something special in Cheyenne, not just a school or a family, but a model of how different people could live and grow together, respecting each other and working toward common goals. "Nathan," she said, turning to look him in the eyes, "thank you for showing me that true love doesn't diminish our dreams, but makes them grow." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me that it's never too late to start a new chapter." And under the infinite stars of the Wyoming sky, Rose Murphy Garrett understood that she had found not only a home, but a purpose that would echo through generations. The children she had taught would carry with them not only knowledge but the understanding that differences can be bridges instead of barriers, and that education is the most powerful instrument of transformation that exists. 2 years later, when visitors from other territories came to Cheyenne to observe the educational experiment that was changing the American West, they always commented on the evident harmony in the community. Children of different backgrounds played together. Parents of various nationalities collaborated on community projects, and there was a sense of possibility in the air that was almost tangible. Rose, now the mother of a red-haired girl named Sarah Eleanor Garrett, continued teaching with the same passion as in the early days. Nathan had become a respected advocate for rural education, often consulted by other communities that wanted to implement similar programs. And Joshua, who had graduated with honors from Denver, had returned to establish the territory's first high school, where young people from all over the region came to study. Eleanor and William were married in a ceremony that united Boston and Cheyenne in a celebration of cultures, and together they created a network of normal schools that spread throughout the American West. Silas Pemberton, in an irony that went unnoticed by no one, became one of the biggest financiers of the educational expansion, finally recognizing that investing in education was investing in the prosperous future of the region. And so, in a small town on the plains of Wyoming, a fiery-haired Irish teacher had planted seeds that blossomed into a silent but powerful revolution, a revolution built not with weapons or fiery speeches, but with patience, love, and the unwavering belief that every child deserves the chance to discover their own possibilities. The story of Rose Murphy Garrett became a legend in the region, told and retold through the generations, always ending with the same observation, that the true power of change does not reside in force or authority, but in the courage of a person who refuses to accept that's just the way it is. as a definitive answer to any injustice. And in Cheyenne, where the wind still whispers through the golden plains, the legacy of that brave Irish woman lives on in every child who learns that their differences are gifts, not obstacles, and that education is the fundamental right that opens all other possible paths.